we can just have a conversation.
Sure.
You don't have to be talking to the camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
At first, could you introduce yourself, who you are, and a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. My name is Justin Kang. I'm the executive director of City Awake, and my backstory. Gosh, where do you want me to start? What can I talk about?
If you had to say an origin for you taking this trajectory in life and trying to be so active, where do you would say the beginning of that trajectory would start?
That is a great question. I really always identified myself, I would say it started in college. I went to a college called Brandeis University. It's been historically recognized as a school of activism, a school of social justice. And there I really learned the principles, I think, of activism, of community organizing and such. So I think that initial experience and that exposure to a lot of like-minded students, like-minded faculty, understanding how social change can be, take many different avenues and vehicles, was very fulfilling. Then I graduated and I went to a company called Mass Challenge. Mass Challenge is the biggest global accelerator in the world, where they they train 128 startups every year to become the next big business. There I learned sort of the concept of entrepreneurship, and sort of I married this thought process of how to think creatively for new bold solutions, as well as tying it together with the social justice background, and that sort of really helped create my identity.
All right. Before we were on camera, you mentioned Opportunity Nation. What was your experience like working there?
Opportunity Nation was, I've always admired Alan Casey, like a lot of young people do. He's been a thought leader, a social entrepreneur, a pioneer, a godfather of this entire space. So, anything he does, I want to be a part of. So I applied for the job. He was sadly leaving for his first or second Senate campaign, so I never got to work directly with him. But ultimately, Opportunity Nation for me is about how to bring different stakeholders together, different sectors, audiences, because ultimately if we want to have any lasting change, it needs to be one that's systematic and cross-cutting. It can't just be one type of person, it can't be one type of sector, it can't be one type of generation. It needs a broad cross-sector, cross-issue approach. So Opportunity Nation, I was a national organizer for them. I would go to different states, mobilize young people, mobilize community leaders to try to advance their agenda for economic mobility, and I really, I think, honed my skills around organizing because of that job.
All right. And City Awake, what's the inception behind that? How did you come to that?
Yes, that's a good question. I was working full-time at a technology startup over 2 years ago, and I love that tech company. I learned a lot from it, maybe more so than any other job that I ever had, because it allowed me to understand how to build a company. So I started City Awake, though, because that job was very intellectually interesting, but it wasn't a personal passion. We were just selling a technology tool, no social impact at all. So I saw City Awake as my leverage of giving back to the community the best way I knew possible by doing things that I most identify with.
And those are?
For this particular conversation, I learned a few years ago the best way to make impact, positive impact, is around identifying with your theory of change or the audience. So a lot of times, I try to steer away from an outsider approach where, I don't think I'm the best person to tackle an issue in Rwanda, or I'm not the best person to talk about health inequality because I have no idea about any of that kind of stuff. What I do know is Boston. What I do know is young adults and next-gen leaders, because I live it, I breathe it, it's my identity, it's who I am. So, that was sort of the conception of City Awake, because I was someone who was living through it, and the question is, how do I get out of it and make it better for everyone else?
And creating City Awake, what were some of the challenges that you faced initially?
It's just the general challenges of nonprofits. You got to be scrappy. It's hard to, fundraising has been pretty good for us, but at the end of the day, you got to chase those dollars and make that case. Ultimately, if you're new into a sector that has such a strong identity already, you're a new player, is building that trust and that authenticity with your partners. So, it was nothing that we couldn't overcome because everyone was so receptive, but at the end of the day, it's just when you start your own company, when you start your own nonprofit, it's a labor of love. It's the closest thing that you will ever experience as having a child. So even on the good days, I would just be exhausted because you put all your energy in it, So it's just a matter of dealing with that exhaustion and that rejection and even the celebrations.
Speaking in terms of all this energy that you've invested and all this emotion, do you ever have fears that all this energy could be wasted and that your vision might not be fulfilled?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think ultimately, we're just a small player in this bigger space around social change. There's so much, we're only going to occupy a little percent of that, and there needs to be so much more work done. So the way I look at it is if I can do a little bit to move the needle, just a little bit, and everyone else does their little bit to move the needle, then that'll make some gigantic tidal wave of change. So at the end of the day, I'd rather try, I'd rather be in the arena, I'd rather try to be great and dare for greatness and open myself up for failure, because rather try and fail versus be apathetic.
Now, we're here at our convention. I was actually invited as a delegate, so that means I'm going to be attending most, if not all, of the next upcoming 40 events.
Yeah.
What do you want other delegates to take away, and what do you want us to do with the inspiration that we gained at this event today?
I hope that it comes across that age should not be a barrier of contribution. We often think that wisdom comes with experience, and it does to an extent, but it goes hand in hand. Ultimately, we need cross-general approaches. We need to train and cultivate the next generation of leaders, and we can't sit idly by when these issues of race, of social inequality, economic justice, all these things, global warming, are at the forefront, and we need to make sure that we tackle it and not wait 2 decades from now. So for us, it's about motivating people to understand that they are valued and they should be active in shaping the future of this region.
So far, what's been your favorite part of our convention?
I'm just happy about that it's a cross-section of Greater Boston. We can categorize that by race or gender and neighborhood and whatever. But at the end of the day, we're very proud about the demographics that we hit, because if this is going to be successful, it needs to be a cross-section of Greater Boston. It can't just be one particular neighborhood, one particular economic status. It can be one race, one gender, because this generation is the most diverse that you've ever seen, and the only way we'll succeed is by ensuring that we are inclusive and open to all.
Speaking in terms of diversity, that was one thing that stood out to me at one point when I was in the main hall, looking around. I was like, wow, this is amazing, because there were so many different races, religions, probably ideologies being represented. So what would you say to us as the delegates that we can do to make this vision successful?
Jump right in. I think ultimately it's about challenging us, ensuring that we're being honest, and for you to come to the events, to make new connections, to really build ties to the city. I think that's the best way to do it.
All right, I want to close on this last question, which is, if you had advice to give to somebody that may be watching this video, maybe they're involved with City Awake, or maybe they're just somebody watching, what advice would you give them to take a role in creating the greater Boston that we want for ourselves and for future generations?
I think take an approach where you're unafraid. The city is very small. It's amazing to see how a year your career can transform if you just put the hard work into it. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other variables there, but at the end of the day, you have an opportunity versus other cities where there's just so many resources here, so many smart people here. There isn't a reason why we can't solve some of these issues that are perplexing to me. So I think don't wait, don't be idle. You don't have to start your own organization. You don't have to run for office. But there's so many big and small ways to be an active citizen.
Very true. And where can the viewers find City Awake on social media?
City Awake Boston is our Twitter handle. City Awake is our Instagram handle.
Okay, sounds good, man. I want to thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.